Hello, and welcome to the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust's Big Sky Traditions, a podcast where we look at all things music, dance and art from the big sky lands of East Anglia. In this episode, I meet Richard Blake, one of the last remaining dulcimer players in the East. Though the term dulcimer may be familiar to many of you, as it was to me when I first started researching this episode, the dulcimer you're about to hear is quite different. It turns out that dulcimers can be split into two types, hammered or non-hammered. The former holding its origins in Appalachia, whilst the best, most beautiful models of the latter coming from Norwich in the 19th century, though I'll leave Richard to explain the history. The name is about where the similarities end, however, with the dulcimer that Richard plays being a strange-looking instrument, unlike anything I've ever seen before or even heard before, though intensely beautiful. The best description Richard has was that it looked like a piano with no clothes on, though to me perhaps it looked a little more like a small coffin, with hundreds of wires stretched over it. However, the clarity of its sound and the resonance was unlike anything I've ever heard before, with notes seeming to ring on forever. Anyway, enough of me talking. Here is a conversation we had alongside some recordings of Richard playing the naked piano.
I'm Richard Blake, and I live in Hindleveston, up in North Norfolk, and I play the dulcimer. Not to be confused with the Appalachian dulcimer, which is a totally different instrument. We don't talk about the Appalachian dulcimer.
Yeah. To begin with, I'd be really interested to know, before we even get onto these crazy instruments that are surrounding us right now in this room, I'd really like to know how you even began to get into playing the dulcimer. And it's correct to say that it's not the hammered dulcimer, it's just the dulcimer? Or
around here, it's just the dulcimer.
Okay.
Yeah. Hammered is an American term.
Right.
Well, how did I get into it? Well, it's a kind of a long story. I mean, it's kind of the story of my musical life, really. We didn't do much at school musically, but I got a guitar for my 16th birthday, and I became obsessed with it. Failed my A-levels as a result, and I really got into American primitive guitar.
Oh, really?
When it was neither profitable nor popular.
Like John Fay.
John Fay, yeah.
Wonderful, yeah.
That's right. I really got into that. And somebody said, there's a Norwich Folk Festival. You'll like that. Bring your guitar along. So I brought my guitar along to Norwich Folk Festival. Nobody was interested in me playing the guitar at Norwich Folk Festival. But there was this old guy there playing the dulcimer, Billy Bennington. And it was like a revelation, because I realised the music that influenced John Fay, the old country blues stuff, and the music that Billy Bennington was playing was contemporary. It was all happening at the same time between the wars. Billy Bennington just played all sorts of what was popular music in his younger days. So I was really quite taken with this. I didn't really do anything about it for a long while until there was this hippie shop opened up in Norwich called Monday Lunch, and they specialised in all sorts of second-hand instruments and stuff, and kites and anything that they could lay their hands on and sell, basically. And their shop slowly filled up. In the mid-'80s, it sort of slowly filled up with second-hand dulcimers. And enjoying listening to Billy Bennington, right up until, the year he died, I thought, I'll get one of these and learn how to play it. And I had quite a job trying to persuade the people in the shop to actually tune it properly. Because I was smart enough to know that, there was a particular tuning that Billy was using that was kind of like the traditional local tuning. It goes further than that, but so I had to fight to get the right tuning. But I got the right tuning, and I haven't looked back since. I took my, my newly bought dulcimer down to Stowmarket, to the Museum of East Anglian Life. to the launch of Billy Bennington's LP, which was shortly after he died, sadly, so he wasn't there. But Reg Reader was there, showed it to Reg Reader. Reg Reader got all excited and said, oh, it's a nice dulcimer and all this kind of thing. And so I just persevered, but, it's waxed and waned sort of, up until until the 90s, my dulcimer playing waxed and waned. I play a load of other instruments.
Right.
And you don't really want to know. But it's it waxed and waned until at some point when I was living in Germany, where my missus comes from, and we went to some kind of open day at a windmill somewhere, and I just thought, I'll take my dulcimer along. Sat on a bench in the open air and played this thing, and everybody loved it. And I thought, actually, this is not the reaction I have to some of my other instruments, which includes various kinds of bagpipes. You can imagine. I mean, I taught myself to play the bagpipes in pub sessions in Norwich in the 80s. Right? I taught myself live. In public, right? So reaction is not necessarily very positive to that. Excuse me. So I was, I was sitting on a bench by this old windmill, playing the dulcimer, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's really, really nice. Oh, that's great. Oh, lovely." And I thought, this is a bit all right. Maybe I should concentrate a bit more on the dulcimer. And and I was sort of kind of honed into it. And sort of when we eventually moved back to Norfolk, the scene was set because Billy Bennington was long dead, and Reg Reader was way down in Suffolk. But I mean, Reg Reader and his grandson. Tom Knights, who is Reg Reader trained up his grandson,
right? And
his Tom Knights is still playing. Well, he's actually taken it up again. He reached teenage and went off, did something else, and he's just got married, and it seems to have concentrated his mind. so he's actually sort of picking up on it again, which is really lovely. So I'm not the last, thank Christ for that, because like I say, it's an instrument that really does need keeping alive, and it's really pretty much on life support.
Right. Yeah. So I remember when we had our phone call before we did this, we started talking. You were saying it's an instrument that not a lot of people are playing these days, and actually you think there's a very high chance that practically it could go extinct in terms of kind of people playing it for pleasure.
Yes. I mean, it's there's. So I can actually, I can count up the number of people who are actually playing the East Anglian style dulcimer. There's me, there's Tom Knights, there's George Munger, but he's a very nervous player. Lovely guy. He's the guy who gave me the tunings at the very beginning of this dulcimer odyssey. He's the guy that gave me the tunings. Lovely guy, George Munger. So that's 1, 2, 3. There's my friend Steve, who picked a dulcimer up in an auction, and I did it up for him. I do up dulcimers for people, but it's amazing how many people, I do them up for them. I tune them, make sure they're all working again, and they're seldom actually taken out and played.
Oh, really?
So I'd say there's about 4 or 5 of us still playing, and on various levels, of playing, and I'm sort of probably the most, what's the right word?
Senior?
Studious. I'm the most focused, obsessed with playing it. Yeah, put it that way.
Yeah. to admit, until I came to your house today, and I'd never seen a dulcimer like this. I'd seen obviously the cursed Appalachian dulcimers.
Yeah.
But I'd never seen one that you play on a table like this. Obviously, I'd heard a bit of Billy Bennington's LPs.
Yeah.
But no, just a fascinating instrument. I've never seen an instrument that looks quite like it.
Yeah.
If you had to describe what a dulcimer was to someone who's never seen one before, how would you describe it?
Well, my friend Barbara describes it as a piano with no clothes on. Although that's a very, very simplistic way of describing it. It's a trapezoid box with an enormous number of strings, and the strings are divided up. I mean, this one that I'm sitting in front of has got 132 strings. Some of them are all tuned to the same note, like that. Oh gosh, that rings on, doesn't it? But the strings are divided up so that they kind of cross over. You've got you've got a bass side, which if you're a piano player is confusing because it's on the opposite side to what it would be on a piano. The bass side's on the right hand side and not the left. And on the left hand side, the strings are divided into two, and you have that's the basic core of the instrument are the first four bridges on the left hand side. That's the core of the instrument, and they play an octave, but it's divided up. So the first four notes are on one side, and the next four notes are on the other side. And that's done by dividing the strings in that way. So you've got a fifth. Yeah, it's about right. A fifth between between the two sides of the bridge. And this is the thing. This is what's crucial about an East Anglian one, is that as you go up, that first octave divided over four bridges. As you go up, if you were to do that all the way up with a fifth between them, you'd end up with lots of spare notes. You've got a note there, you'll have a note down here, you've got the same note up there, you don't need that. So what happens is you've got notes that are the bridges that are moved slightly one way or the other, so that that's not a fifth. What is that? It's a sixth, is it? Can't remember. It's something anyway. So that what you end up with is. Let me get this right. I can do it downhill, but not uphill. It's quite strange. You get chromatic scale.
You get chromatic scale.
You get chromatic scale, and you can play in. I was practicing. I was doing scale runs, just practicing before you came, and I suddenly discovered I can play perfectly well in the key of F sharp major.
Yeah.
And I thought, who plays in F sharp major? I can.
That's fascinating. Just talking a bit more about the tuning, you said there's a very specific. The tuning was having an issue, right? Discovering how to tune it.
Yeah.
How is it tuned exactly, and how did you discover a right East Anglian way to tune it?
Well, that was George Munger who tumbled me onto the tuning, because I didn't know how to tune the thing, and so I've just bought this dulcimer. How do I tune it? And George Munger said, "Oh, I'll send you the tunings that I use." And he sent a couple. I've still got the scrappy bit of paper somewhere, and and it's got the traditional East Anglian tuning. And it's got a chromatic tuning that he used on one of his dulcimers, which is totally bizarre because it's completely 12-tone, and I can't find my way around that. And what was the other tuning? He sent three tunings. I can't remember what the third one was, but anyway, but there was me being very much, interested in the history and tradition, and very much influenced by a sense of place. My grandfather, who's over there on the mantelpiece, was an author, and he wrote strings of books about Suffolk, because that's where he was from, his family's from. So I was, at an early age, I was inculcated with local history. So it was natural for me to want to use the local tuning. Subsequently, I've discovered it's not necessarily, historically, it's a much more widespread tuning. And I find it a hell of a lot more logical than any other tuning.
I was wondering if you could give us a very brief description of its history. Where does it come from, and what's its place within the musical canon? I suppose would be the right term. What's its origins?
Well, the origins of the dulcimer, it's hugely hotly contested, because I'm going to and ah a lot here.
No, that's all right.
There are lots and lots of people out there. There are books written down in books to say that it comes from the Middle East and all this kind of thing. It doesn't. It doesn't come from the Middle East. It probably arose in sort of northern Italy, Alpine area during the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance. Originally, it was the psaltery. And this is the thing that gets all your academics and niggers in a twist, because obviously a psaltery, from Greek salo, to pluck, and the medieval psaltery, pre-dulcimer days, was exclusively plucked. At some point, the idea of hitting it with little hammers came in, and that technological shift altered the shape and the design of the instrument.
Right.
And it would appear that technological boost happened in the Renaissance, early Renaissance, northern Italy, I would suggest. Although if you look at stained glass windows, medieval stained glass windows, 15th century medieval stained glass windows of the Norwich School, there is a representation of a dulcimer player hitting it with sticks, trapezoid shape. I'd say just like this, but obviously it's artistic license, but it's pretty much like this. In Stratton Strawless Church. High up in Stratton Strawless Church, and I reckon that is probably one of the oldest representations of a dulcimer as we know it today. So that's pretty cool, coming from Norfolk as well. But I think the whole influence was Renaissance Italy, going into the Baroque, and then it was hugely popular as an amateur's instrument in high society during the Baroque era and into classical. And it just died out in its where it came from around about 1800. Nobody played it anymore. About in Italy after about 1800. But there was lots of music written for it. And and then all of a sudden, around about 1850, documentary evidence and actually concrete evidence, the actual instruments, it popped up in various parts of Britain in various forms. And it was a pub instrument. Birmingham dulcimers, they're a bit different from ours. London dulcimers are very, very similar, often tuned the same, but the actual outline is slightly different. And then there's these homemade Glasgow ones. The Scottish ones, they are built like barn doors, and they weigh a ton. But they were hugely popular right into the 20s and 30s up in Glasgow. And these ones, from about 1850 to about 1910, was their, the East Anglian ones. About 1850 to 1910 was the height of their popularity.
Right.
Yeah. And it's easy to see why they died out. There's a lot of attention to detail required to keep them in tune and keep them in playing condition. Recorded music came in, radio, that kind of thing. When you don't need a spare dulcimer player in the pub if you've got a radio going or a wind up gramophone or something like that. And it's when recorded music came in and broadcasting came in. The idea that you'd have and they were paid. You had a paid dulcimer player in the corner of the pub providing your background music. Right. There was a little bit of competition from mechanical music, obviously. Like music boxes and things like that. The old what's that called? Not pangolin. Polyphone. The polyphone. You're coining the slot polyphones. They were quite popular, and then they would be the competition. But a polyphone was always a very expensive thing to install in your pub. A bit like the early form of jukebox.
That's fascinating. It's transition from high society in the 18th century, right, and then transitioning into becoming a pub instrument at the end of the 19th century.
And one of the things that fascinates me, I'm banging my head at the wall, what happened in between? Where was it in between? Because it's like, I got friends in Germany, and there's in the early music circles, there is a revival going on of the Baroque salterio, as it's called salterio in Italy. There's a revival going on of the Baroque dulcimer, known as the salterio. And it's absolutely fascinating. There's tons of this music out there. And, and they're getting really good. But, nobody in this country has really picked up on this yet. the oldest Norfolk dulcimer is in York Castle Museum, and it's an 18th century instrument. It's probably provincial. It was definitely made in Norfolk. It's got a label on it. It says it was made in Walsingham.
Yeah.
And it's probably early to mid 18th century. And it looks to me as though it's based on a highly sophisticated model. It's got a huge extension to this side, which makes the bass strings longer.
Yeah.
So it can be used as what they call in the 18th century a continuo instrument. So there are various sort of theories in my head as to why that instrument was made and that sort of thing, but it's all fairly wishy-washy yet. The thing we're always looking for is documentary evidence, and documentary evidence is always thin on the ground, especially once you get to the 18th century.
Yeah, absolutely.
But hey, there's this sort of missing link. So how did it get from high society to being a hugely popular pub instrument?
Yeah, fascinating.
I've trawled the newspapers, which is fascinating. So is Katie Housen, actually. I'm not alone in this research. I've trawled the newspapers, and it's amazing. The statistics. There's the odd one or two little mentions of a dulcimer, obviously an instrument. Sometimes the word dulcimer is used figuratively. There's one or two references in the early part of the 19th century, and then from about 1850 onwards, there's just this explosion. And the newspaper stories that fascinate me the most are the court cases, where there's something as a scrap in the pub or that kind of thing.
Also, not involving a dulcimer.
Yes. Oh, yes. So one of the there's one where it's actually quite a late newspaper report where a guy was how did he get sick? I can't remember what he got. He got fined, but this guy knocked the dulcimer player's dulcimer off the table. The dulcimer player, and it describes the whole scene.
Yeah.
The dulcimer. This was in Lowestoft, actually. The dulcimer player had the dulcimer supported by a beer glass, which is it's what you do. I mean, the dulcimer behind me hasn't got a foot. Most of these East Anglian dulcimers have a little foot that flaps down, so they're at an angle.
Right.
But this guy obviously didn't have a foot on his dulcimer. He balanced it on a pint pot. Somebody took exception to it. Whacked the dulcimer on the floor. The dulcimer player gave as good as he got. He gave him a shiner as well. But it was the guy who damaged the dulcimer who got fined.
Right, that's so fascinating.
The dulcimer player is always innocent.
Yeah.
Don't shoot the piano player. It's basically the same sort of thing,
Actually, it's a local instrument in terms of where they're made. You said in Norwich.
In Norwich, yeah.
A key place. So when did they start getting made in Norwich roughly? When did this industry start up?
Yeah, well, that's around about 1850.
Right.
We haven't found a dulcimer yet that is, apart from the one in York Castle Museum, which is a real exception. We haven't found a dulcimer yet that sort of dates any earlier than about the 1850s. That said, some dulcimers, a lot of the older dulcimers have been very tampered with over the years and altered and chopped and changed. This famous dulcimer that I've got that belonged to Frank Rice and belonged to David Kettlewell, the Frank Rice was a woodworking teacher, and he's done a heck of a lot of tinkering around on that. I think it's a very old one.
Yeah.
But I can't confirm it because there's been too much tinkering around on it, and you can't tell what's old and what's new. Well, I can tell what some of the things that are new, but there comes a point where you're just not sure. But we haven't found any earlier than 1850s, right. And there's two names to conjure with, both of whom started their lives in the same region of Norwich, Coslaney. Very interesting area of Norwich. It's just north of the river. What's a favourite? If you know your Norwich pubs, the White Lion, Oak Street.
Oh yeah. I often go drinking there.
It's a lovely pub. My favourite pub in Norwich.
Yeah.
I seldom go in there now, but it's one of my favourite pubs in Norwich. That's Coslaney.
Right.
That round tower church there. That's St Mary's, Coslaney. But that area. That's where a lot of the known or even suspected dulcimer makers were born. That's where they were born. Mark Widows is the principal one. He's the only one who actually stamped his name on his dulcimers. And William Chilvers. Now, William Chilvers... he moved out of Norwich to Halesworth and spent the rest of his life in Halesworth. Well, no, he didn't. I tell a lie. He did come back to Norwich just before he died.
Right.
But the peculiar thing is both Widows and Chilvers, they were originally silk weavers.
Right.
And obviously that was a big industry in Norwich, weaving, textiles, all your 19th century, 18th century, descriptions of Norwich. They always say, what the principal industry is, bombazines and textiles,
right,
and brewing, and later on shoes.
Yeah.
But they both. Mark Widows and William Chilvers, they were both originally weavers.
Right.
And obviously, in the 19th century, all that industry was in a steep decline. And they were finding other things to do. And when William Chilvers moved out to Halesworth, first we know of him in Halesworth, he's a musical instrument maker. And he is ever after. Which is, okay, fair enough. But where did he get the design from?
Yeah.
Who knows? But it's definitely, as far as I'm concerned, it's a Norwich design. But Mark Widows stayed in Norwich. He had many strings to his bow, literally, because he actually, William Hill and Sons, the violin people, they have a list of all known English violins, and one of them was made by Mark Widows.
Wow.
In 1837. So it says on their website. So he was making instruments quite early on in his career, but he was also a pub landlord. Everybody had more than one job in those days if they wanted to survive. So he was a pub landlord, and he made dulcimers, and he made the best dulcimers going. And eventually, I think when he got, perhaps when, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go along here, but when he found keep running a pub too much for him, he changed professions again and became a boat builder.
Right.
And he was building boats, probably things like wherries and rowing boats on the river, because he was based in King Street. In Norwich, right. And he was boat builder and instrument maker.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
that's so fascinating. What is the dulcimer's place within the band? Because you can play it by yourself, but you also talked about playing within a band with a group of other people.
Yeah.
Is it sort of like is it playing the melody within the piece, or is it more of the backing?
Well, I mean, as a pub instrument, it's always been a solo instrument, but in a band, it does tend to take on an accompanying role.
Right.
Because the chords, are so easy, and because it rings on, so it takes on what in the 18th century would be called a continuo role. It's not a bass instrument, but it just fills in all that harmony. Basically, I mean, what I do in a band situation, I play the melody, but I play the melody like nobody else recognises it.
In a good way, I hope.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And Billy Bennington, all those recordings of Billy Bennington talking, he says that he said pretty much the same thing. He admitted that sometimes he just throws other people off because he's just playing some kind of wild variation.
Yeah.
And this was a thing that actually the older players like Billy Bennington and Billy Cooper and all them, not so much Reg Reader. Reg Reader was a real gentleman. He really was a really good band player.
Yeah.
Because he didn't do anything fancy. But Billy Bennington, oh boy, and also Billy Cooper, who was the son of the guy that taught Billy Bennington.
Wow.
This is another This is another much repeated fallacy that Billy Cooper taught Billy Bennington. No, Billy Cooper's dad taught Billy Bennington.
Yeah.
And that's crucial to say, because Billy Cooper's dad was a bandmaster. What they used to do, the dulcimer players, they used to play what might be a familiar tune, and then they would add an extra bit in so the other person couldn't join in. It's a bit like this rivalry between singers. You don't sing somebody else's song. And you've got an advantage if you're a good dulcimer player. You can just throw in another part that nobody else knows.
Right. Yeah.
And that shuts them up.
That's so fascinating. Know Billy Bennington personally, did you?
No, very sadly, I was far too shy. I am very, very shy. I mean, I find it hard to look at you. You might notice that I find it very hard to look in your eye.
Sure, yeah.
I don't look people in the eye. I was kind of like, I was inspired by him, but no, I never met him to talk to. When I bought my first dulcimer in 1986, that was the year he died.
Right.
I mean, subsequently, Reg Reader, he was such a nice bloke. He was very understanding.
Yeah.
And, I played side by side with him on a couple of occasions. A lovely guy to work with.
Yeah.
So I missed out there. There's this footage that recently came up of Billy Bennington that East Anglian Traditional Music Trust have put on their website. The footage, not footage. What do you call it? You'd call it footage, do you?
Yeah,
sound. Yeah. But that's absolutely fascinating because he plays. He's demonstrating the sort of tunes he plays to somebody who's just bought a dulcimer off him.
Right.
And he plays some of these familiar tunes that I'm trying to learn.
Yeah.
And he plays them flipping differently every flipping time. Oh, yeah. There's this tune called tune called Dulcie Bell, which was written by Billy Cooper's father, Frederick William Cooper. And it is sort of like a bit of a showpiece.
Yeah.
And he adds a completely new part to it. Completely new. Never heard it before.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, that's good. I'll learn that as well. Because that's my ambition. My ambition is to try and it's kind of twofold. It's really to play as many Billy Bennington tunes as I can, and also to sort of incorporate or demonstrate that the 18th century repertoire is actually fits the 19th century Norfolk dulcimer absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
It's built for it. It's like I mean, you could sneer and say it's a bit like Glenn Gould playing Bach,
Right. Yeah.
but hey, it's all the notes are in the right place. The notes are all there.
Yeah.
But
lastly, I'd really like to ask you sort of what would you like as the future for the dulcimer? What would you love to see? What do you think the future is going to be, and what would you like the future to be for it?
Well, I would like the instrument to be taken seriously, and I would like the historic instrument to be taken seriously, which sounds a bit sort of toffee nose and stuffy, but I mean the 18th century salterio is in Germany and Austria is having a huge revival on the early music scene, and I would like something similar to happen to the Norfolk dulcimer. I'd like people to sort of look at this as this is a revival of historic music, because as time rolls on, in the early music scene, people are now playing Wagner on original instruments. And what's wrong with playing 19th century pub music on original instruments? That would be my absolute dream, to think that, when I'm dead and gone, the next generation or the next generation after that will be seriously playing 19th century pub music on original instruments.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, your early music scene, it just stuck in the Middle Ages. I mean, okay, that's a bit of that's a funny way to put it, but yeah, I mean, in the short term, whilst I'm still alive, I do really, really want to put a lot of this information in book form. There's a lovely website. John and Katie Howson have done the East Anglian dulcimer website. That's a lovely website. I really, really like it. But I'm a book person. And I like to have things in book form. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who likes to have stuff in book form. I'd like to actually see it taken seriously, Because, I mean, ethnomusicology is we tend to sort of look at ethnomusicology as a study of the other music, other people's music, not our music. But actually, I think we're in a position of strength if we're looking at our music, because it's here. It's right in front of us. It's before our nose. So I think people need to, it needs to be taken more seriously, if that's not too stuffy.
No, it's not. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Big Sky Traditions, the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust podcast. It was an absolute pleasure chatting to Richard in his cosy living room surrounded by these strange and ancient instruments, and I must say a huge thank you to him for sharing his boundless knowledge of the instrument, as well as his talents as a musician. I felt particularly emotionally affected listening to Richard play, thinking to myself how potentially I may be one of the last few to hear this instrument perform live, and what a great shame it would be to lose such a haunting, beautiful sound from this world. However, like Richard said, the dulcimer has disappeared before, way back in the 19th century, yet 50 years later it arose again, though being played in an entirely different setting. Perhaps the dulcimer will have its heyday again, sometime in the future. I very much hope it does. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.